Okay, we're talking about industrialization of the North in Chapter 9. Where we're starting, at this point in history, goods are produced by something called the putting out system. That meant that different people put out products in order to make one larger product. Say, for the example of shoemaking, maybe my family was the one who cut soles, with all the equipment, and we were skilled artisans at cutting the soles of shoes. And then let's say maybe Dustin's family was the artisan family known for their craftsmanship of cutting the uppers. They cut leather and they were leather workers. So they would do that. And then Cassidy's family was known for sewing. So Cassidy's family then would do the sewing for these leather uppers. And maybe Callista's family was known for their super adhesive product that they made. So they were responsible for gluing the stitched uppers to the soles of the shoes. You can see a lot of people played a role in making one pair of shoes, and it was all done by hand craftsmanship, which meant these products were rather on the expensive side. It cost a lot of money to have so many different people make them. So as factory work started, production became cheaper because these products were no longer made by artisans, they were made by people and machinery. The machinery did most of the work, and they were able to do the work consistently. In Great Britain in the early 1800s, they had the most advanced factories because they'd had factories longer than other places, quite honestly. So Great Britain was very protective of their factory knowledge, and they banned immigration so that they could keep their mechanics to themselves and not risk losing their technology. They wanted to maintain the upper hand in manufacturing. But one mechanic named Samuel Slater actually did get to travel to the US, and he stayed, and he became the founder of the first really successful cotton mill in the United States. Jefferson's embargo on British goods made the US citizens invest in industry. Now, which is ironic because Jefferson really wanted the US's economy to be based on agriculture. But in pushing for the embargo on US buying British goods, it made us have to make our own products. The embargo of 1807 kept US merchants from the Atlantic trade, and that's why they had to start producing their own goods. We weren't able to trade with other people. We had to produce our own. It's interesting to say that at this point in history, we have people calling for something like this again, brought about by the fact that the coronavirus showed us just how much we depend on production of goods from China. So there are people who are calling for an embargo again to force the US to start producing goods that are currently made in China, such as masks and some of the hazmat suits that our professional care workers have been wearing in coronavirus settings, like in hospitals. The War of 1812, as all wars do, caused financial problems that hurt US businesses, and because the businesses were hurting, many turned to jobs in manufacturing. Francis Cabot Lowell had been in Great Britain, and he had seen factories that really impressed him. So he memorized the machinery and came back to the United States and worked from his memory to create a power loom that replaced hand weaving. So now we have a successful textile mill growing in the United States. We have these pop-up towns that came about because of industry, and one of those was because of Lowell's textile mill. Lowell, as well as Waltham, created a center for women's factory work. Lowell, Massachusetts is named for Lowell, who started industry in this particular town. Early mills were built near water for hydroelectric power. But electricity changed that. You didn't have to be located near a river all of a sudden in order to develop an industry or a factory. So electricity changed things and made all locations a level playing ground for industry. They gave women the opportunity to work and live outside the house, which gave them more marriage options. Lowell, Massachusetts was the one that focused on this most because Lowell built his industry, his textile industry, as a women's factory. Women worked in this factory. It gave women from the country an opportunity to move to the city, a reason to move to the city, where they might have other options. Maybe they had other options for school, or maybe other options for meeting somebody else to marry. It gave them an opportunity to live outside the home. But they lived outside the home in these situations that were more like a dorm, like you would expect dorm life to be in the 1940s and 50s, that sort of thing, because their living conditions were like a boarding house or a dorm-like kind of setting. And the women had chaperones. They had very strict rules. They worked 12 hours a day, and while they were at work, they were not allowed to talk at all. They also were not allowed to swear or drink, and they had to attend church. Many women had limited work opportunities until this. The results of mechanization increased the output of goods to be sold and lowered the prices because mechanization made production less expensive. There was an increase in textile factories. There were actually 878 in New England when the Civil War began. These textile factories employed more than 100,000 people and produced more than 940 yards of cloth. And their success spurred textile mills everywhere. There were other factories developing other than just textile mills, like shoes, like we talked about, leather tanning, paper making, gun making, clock making, and flour milling. There was a time when having a clock in your house was a luxury because clocks were so expensive. And this made lots of things more affordable for people to actually have at home, which led to the rise of consumerism. Lower prices plus more product on shelves means that more people can afford to buy. Things were no longer luxury items like clocks. Oil lamps replaced candles as the lighting system, and they were more affordable, so more people had them now. They used parlor stoves for heating, so sort of like what we would call a space heater today, a wood-burning space heater kind of situation. So parlor stoves were used for heating. Cook stoves developed with multiple burners so the women could cook more. So now we have convenience too. Not just are we able to buy more and have better things, but now we're talking real convenience. And carpet, furniture, and wallpaper also were affordable, no longer just for the wealthy. So this new work experience changed the way of life for people who worked. These farmers and artisans, the shoe example that I used at the beginning of the lecture, where we each contributed something different to the production of one single pair of shoes, in that situation, we controlled our own time. If I was the one who cut the shoe soles and I didn't feel like it one day, I just didn't do it. I did it the next day when I wanted to do it. Farmers could work around their harvest. They did whatever they needed to do on their own time. However, factory life was very different because they demanded a lot of time and they demanded certain hours. Most of them had 12-hour days, and they demanded that you be there on time. If you were not there on time, if you were just 5 minutes late, they could dock equal hours of pay. So, if you missed 5 minutes, they might dock a full hour of pay. They tried to have fewer people do more work, which sometimes led to accidents. Anytime you have a lot of machinery that people are operating, you have them tired, you have them multitasking, they're doing a lot of different things, you open the way to mistakes. And occupational safety was not a concern at this point. The wages were low. Generally speaking, men earned $300 a year. It took about $600 a year for a family of 5. So you can see nobody's getting ahead here. They're working a lot of long hours, and they're being worked really hard while they're working. So this begins our labor movement, these conditions of long hours and low pay. Women away from home bonded with each other, and they began to protest work conditions and pay. These women in the textile factories in Lowell, Massachusetts, were not able to talk during work, but they definitely talked when they got back to the boarding house. And they started talking about how long they had to work and the conditions they worked in and the lack of pay. So they began to protest. The thing is, even though the Lowell Factories Association organized strikes and wage cuts, they were not always effective because there were always women on this waiting list willing to come work. So they didn't have much of a threat as far as, if you don't meet our demands, you won't have anyone doing your work, because there was always a list of women waiting to come to work. For that reason, these strikes were rarely successful. The women of Lowell, the Lowell Female Labor Reform Association, protested the 12-hour workday. It's going to be a while before we get to the 8-hour or 9-hour workday. So the labor movement was critical of industrialization because factory owners made big profits, but the workers hardly made any. We have the labor theory of value. It says the value of a product should accurately reflect the labor needed to produce it, and that workers should receive a distribution of profits proportionate to their work. Well, that's nice, but it didn't happen that way because the people who owned the factories wanted to keep most of that profit for themselves. The Working Men's Party was developed by Thomas Skidmore, and they protested the exploitation of workers. They wanted equality for all workers and wanted an end to debtors' prison. I am so sorry. I made these slides very late at night, and I can see many misspellings just on this one slide. So the slides that I attach to your module will not have these errors. So for error-free, you can check those. Public domain land is going to be sold by the federal government during this time, and that's to encourage people to expand and to grow factories and to grow farms. We have the land law of 1796 that sold 640-acre parcels of land in Ohio for $2 per acre. The land law of 1800 reduced the minimum parcel size by half and set up sales on credit to encourage farmers to move to the Northwest Territory. So now not only are the prices low, you don't even have to have money. You can buy on credit. So this is a really risky investment. If you give people a loan that can't afford to pay it back, you know that that's not a good investment. A lot of times we think of our country's first big economic depression as the Great Depression because the name says it's great. But our first one was actually the Panic of 1819. State banks would not lend money for farmers to get public land. So we created more banks to meet demand. Kentucky alone created 46 banks, and each bank at this time in the state could produce their own money. So now we have a lot of new banks, and they're printing their own money. The money's worthless. Land prices skyrocketed. Money is worthless. Nobody can afford to buy. During the War of 1812, the Bank of the U.S. suspended payments of specie, which is the hard money, gold and silver coins. If clients demanded gold or silver coins, the bank would crash. So they printed more paper money for people to just exchange worthlessly. The Second Bank of the U.S. made risky loans, which created more inflation. And the Panic of 1819, as I said, was the country's first economic depression. In terms of transportation, we have some exciting things developing. We have Cumberland Road, which was the first national highway. It was constructed from Maryland to Illinois, and construction started in 1811. The federal government built the road, but the state and local governments built the turnpikes or toll bridges that would connect to the road, to the highway. The Erie Canal linked the Hudson River, New York City, and the Atlantic seaboard to the Great Lakes and the Mississippi River Valley. This really helped decrease shipping costs and travel time to the west. Also, the Wabash and Erie canals in the early 1840s were a total of 450 miles long, the longest canal system in North America. We also have the development of railroads during this time. In the late 1820s, steam engines start competing with horse-drawn engines, and the Mohawk and Hudson Railroad is the first steam locomotive in the United States. Railroads increased dramatically in the mid-1800s, and there were 30,000 mile railroad track by the start of the Civil War. Of course, the Civil War impeded that once it began. Also, I want to mention here that the steam engine is what we generally refer to as the beginning of the Industrial Revolution. We talked about how these factories were based on water, steam, which you need for steam at the beginning. But the Industrial Revolution isn't the only one. It's the first one. The one that we're talking about now is the first Industrial Revolution. The second Industrial Revolution involved electric motors. And the third Industrial Revolution is a big chunk of time, I'd say about a 50-year period of time from the mid-1940s to the 1990s, where we start seeing the development of things like computers. And the internet is at its very beginning stage in that time frame. Even though it wasn't widely available and popular in households, we do have government entities using this communication system. So right now, we are living in the fourth Industrial Revolution, and it's cloud-based technology, which is really exciting. It's stuff like artificial intelligence. It's the technology that makes it possible for you to say, Alexa, call somebody, or whatever, or Siri, check this. So you will have many other industrial revolutions in your lifetime. Just because we talk about the Industrial Revolution, that just means the first one. The middle class is growing at this time, and it's made up of enterprising artisans and small merchants. So these artisans who were very much part of the putting out system are now jobless. So they're having to reinvent themselves. And they are doing that using their skills, which kind of propels them to this middle class status. They worried that if they didn't work hard, they might fall into the working class. So we're talking about managers, small merchants, store owners, that sort of thing, who really want to stay middle class. They don't want to fall into factory work. They value cleanliness, discipline, morality, hard work, education, and manners. And the women in the home, or the women worked in the home to care for the children and take care of the house, which shows that value of cleanliness. They also teach the children. They teach the children manners, morality, discipline of hard work, and that is their education at this time. We still don't have a straight up public education system yet that's required. The goal was to keep the women and children from working for the working class. Education took a back seat to work at times. So if people were attending school, then it would be secondary to the family's need for certain work to be done at certain times. If that was for, like if your family had a business, then there might be times when you would have to work at that business to help, which taught work ethic, which was also part of education. Women took in additional work at home, like laundry for other people or sewing. Sometimes they might even go clean other people's homes. And the working class enjoys entertainment. All classes are able to enjoy some of this entertainment, like circuses, because they were inexpensive, baseball games, because they were also inexpensive. Everyone could afford to attend a baseball game. And taverns were also a source of entertainment. Amusement parks actually start developing in this time period too, to give people something to look forward to and a way to spend their time off, which basically was only on Sunday because these people worked 6 days a week. Right, that covers chapter 9, and we will cover chapter 10 next time.